Hello, my name is Tosca Bruno van Vijwijken and I co-direct the Transnational NGO Initiative. Today we have the honor of interviewing Dr. Werner Schleiffer. And Werner has had a long career, over 30 years, in international development and relief. He has worked for 26 years with the World Food Programme, or WFP, as well as with a couple of other UN agencies. And he has also worked for, is it about 6-7 years, in CoNGO, which is the conference, if I'm going to say this right, of NGOs, non-governmental organizations in consultative relationship with the UN. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the issues that Werner dealt with when he led that organization. So thank you for allowing us to interview you today.
Thank you.
So let's first talk a little bit about CoNGO, because
Yes.
it's an agency that not necessarily all students who will listen to this interview will be aware of. Tell me a little bit.
Well, CoNGO is an umbrella UN organization, actually with some 640 member NGOs from all over the world, and what was always quite important to me, from both developing countries and developed countries. Right. A very heterogeneous organization with internationally operating NGOs, but also NGOs that focus on a particular activity and in a particular region. For example, NGOs that focus on ecological problems in the Amazon River Basin.
I see.
So CoNGO, in a certain way, is an organization with a bridge function to function as a bridge between the NGO world, with all its various types, different levels of expertise, and the UN huge machinery.
Yes.
With all its complications and the difficulties quite often to understand what part of the UN does what, and to what extent, if I want to link up with the UN system, where do I have to go, what do I have to do?
I see. And now I need to follow up a little bit, be a little technical, because I want to understand this better. What's the difference between CoNGO and the NGO Liaison Office to the UN or in the UN?
The NGLS, the UN Liaison Office,
yes,
is the body in the UN system whose task is to establish a link with CoNGO.
So it's the other...
with the NGO world.
Okay.
While the role of CoNGO is a facilitator, how to help NGOs to get a foot in the door in the UN system.
Okay, interesting. This is something I've wanted to know for a while. So let's turn to you as a person first. How did you first become interested to work in international development and relief issues, including emergency relief, after which you later worked in CoNGO? How did that start for you as a young person?
Well, when I look at some of the letters I wrote to my parents or grandparents in the old days, I noticed a letter when I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, what would very much interest me later on would be working for foreign affairs.
In your home country, which is?
For Germany. And as time went by, first I was teaching undergraduate courses and the beginners courses at SUNY in economics, and then went to the UN. Still thinking, okay, this is now a good opportunity to go to other countries, discover them and work there. And at the same time, there was still this, let's say, this potential opportunity to work for German Foreign Affairs. But after having gone there, talked to them and giving a critical analysis of my work in the UN system, I thought it would be so much better to work in the UN system because for a number of reasons. When you work in the UN system in your countries of assignment, you have fabulous opportunities to travel all over. You have much more concrete opportunities to see the results of your work. You do the kind of work that can potentially help millions of people in a very concrete way.
Especially in the World Food Programme.
Yes, exactly. In other words, let's say the level ultimately of professional satisfaction and I would define professional satisfaction in the sense, what have I achieved to make the lives of millions of people easier, help them survive, despite all the vagaries of climate, political issues, but still enable them more to have a life with dignity. For me, throughout my career, the word dignity has been a key word. And that's why ultimately I decided, although I got various reminders from Foreign Affairs in those days, I said, well, I'm sorry, I will stay with the UN.
Interesting. So you have since retired from the UN. You had a leading role in CoNGO for about 6 or 7 years. If you look back upon that time, what were some of the core challenges, typically for an organization like CoNGO? What were you facing at that time, and how was it dealing with those?
One of the key issues for CoNGO, and not just CoNGO, but quite a number of NGOs, is finances. How do you finance an operation? And CoNGO, by definition, had to carry out an operation with, covering all continents, covering so many different NGOs, and filling out this bridge function, this enabling of NGOs to participate in the work of UN agencies, to play a role, to make their voices heard. And by making their voices heard, to make governments think twice and think perhaps, well, after all these NGOs, they might not be our allies, but they give us quite some food for thought. But an operation like that does have its costs, although they're relatively low as compared to foreign affairs work or UN work. And the problem was, who would give the money? Now, obviously, if you have a large percentage of NGOs from developing countries, are you going to charge them a membership fee? And to what should it be? $10, $1, $20? But if it is more than $100, it is quite a burden for them. And so my goal was really to have a very large number, a high percentage of NGOs from developing countries. Then the other thing is, obviously, the ones from developed countries, they should contribute. But a lot of them also cannot contribute that much. If I talk of NGOs from developing countries, $1 or $10, for those from developed countries, quite often $100 or $200 is already quite an amount. So under the circumstances, I used my networks, especially my network with the Swiss government, and got funding to the tune of, say, $500,000 a year. And that really helped so that we could send out weekly newsletters with all the indications of what NGOs should do in order to get accredited to international conferences, how they should prepare themselves, how could they make and have an influence in the deliberations. But and I must say, and this is always something that I considered a very positive approach, the Swiss government never during all these years, not a single time, tried to have any influence on the work of the organization. The only thing they looked at was the money they provided spent wisely. In other words, no cocktail parties, no flights in business or first class, cheap economy tickets, relatively cheap hotels. But that was their only influence. Yeah. And because they gave me that freedom then, And that obviously allowed me to develop the operations very much geared really to the needs and giving the thrust in directing the funds for something that was really going to help NGOs from developing countries especially.
Interesting. At that time, how did you as CoNGO try to define effectiveness? When did you know that you were effective as an organization? Or how did you know that?
Actually, in a certain way, the answer is quite easy. It was when I got NGOs, especially from developing countries, who had never been to the UN, never at an international conference, and that they could stand up, for example, in a human rights conference, stand up with their papers, with a list of problems they wanted to raise, with also with ideas of how to solve human rights issues. But organizations that stood up, that made their points clear in front of member governments, the international audience, and that triggered a reaction among governments saying, oh, these people have a point. We should meet them. We should discuss these issues further. In other words, they made the presentation, but that's the end, not the end of the story.
Right.
How can we really work together?
And that's what meant effectiveness.
And that we got into a situation where NGOs were not considered enemies by governments, but actually very useful interlocutors for an improvement of, for example, of human rights situations in countries. So that was a bit the measurement of my success.
Of your success. Well, let's move to our last question, which is about leadership of an organization like CoNGO, that type of bridging organization between a set of members that constitute NGOs and the UN as a body. What did it mean to be a good leader in CoNGO? What kind of leadership skills, both formal but also informal, were crucial for you to be an effective leader in an organization like CoNGO?
First of all, respect. Respect for people who set up NGOs, very often without receiving a salary, giving their time, efforts in order to define and pursue a certain goal. A large segment of the NGO world nowadays would not be able to exist without so many people giving their time free of charge in order to further work on particular issues. What else? I'm just thinking. Also, the effort not to, in other NGOs, not to see competitors, but to see allies and to look for ways of giving one another helping hands, to join forces and to say, I will not, in front of this big UN forum, be there alone. I will make an effort to get these allies that we speak jointly, and that consequently we have more of an impact, we have a bigger audience, and perhaps ultimately enter into a sustainable process where we can build on something, but with the idea of expanding it and enlarging our audience, and ultimately also with the use of the media, make it an issue that appears in the news and then is brought to the attention of people who don't know the UN world, who don't know the NGO world, but who realize that these issues affect their daily lives.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for today's interview. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.